Hello and welcome back to KITE's Python course. My name is Arman Shah, the Vice President of KITE, and today we are going to be learning introduction to Python syntax. And by the time you finish today's lesson, you will actually write your first lines of Python and you will get a program, hopefully get a program started. So the first thing we have to go over are values and types. So Python has values, which is a concept you have to understand. And an example of these values are hello world, which we talked about before, and just numbers. And to better understand these values, we're going to go over types, and there's different types of values. So as you can see, there's several types of values, but the main ones we're going to go over in these first few lessons to get you started are integers, floats, and strings. So we're going to go over them right now. And integers are simply just whole numbers. It doesn't really matter what number. It could go 0 to infinity, but they're just whole numbers. And floats are numbers with decimal points. So similar to integers, but with decimal points. And strings are anything with a quotation between it. Now you could have hello world, you could have one word, you could have a sentence, you could have even numbers in strings. Even numbers are strings. Floats, you could have decimal points, as long as anything that is within a quotation mark is a string. And note that sometimes I'm using one quotation mark, sometimes I use double. It really doesn't matter what you use, but in your program you want to keep it consistent. You want to use a single or you want to use double, but it doesn't really matter. So we're gonna open up a replit, and I'm gonna go over some strings. So we're gonna print a string. We're gonna start off actually printing an integer. So we're gonna print 3. Let's run that and we get 3. Now let's print a float. So 3.23. And let's also print a string. So we'll print 2 strings. We'll print let's print hello world. Now let's print a number string. Let's run that, and we're gonna get all our values here. Really, the integers and the string are identical. So how would you tell them apart? So what you're gonna do is there's a Python built-in function called type. So if I were to say type, and let's just do 3. We know this type is a string. Let's actually delete this and print this. So we're gonna print what type this string is, and Python can recognize that this is a string because there's quotation marks between it. If we print that type, let's just do a regular number, 3, it's gonna do integer, right? Sorry about that. It's gonna the output is integer because this is an integer. We could also do type, and we could do 3.23. Let's run this, and we get float. So these are the types. This is how you find the type of a value. You just put it in you have to use this type of syntax, type, and then the number between, and then you have to make sure to print it. For example, if I just do type 3, you run that, you're not going to get anything because you're not printing it. So you have to remember you have to print this. Now we're going to get that. So the reason we have strings and we cannot just print hello world like this, you'll see you'll get an error message because this is not a string. Obviously, if we put this as a string, we will get a response. But because if we didn't put this as a string, you get an error message. And that's because it believes hello world is a variable, and we didn't assign this variable yet. So let's go over variables real quick. So variables are something that you choose and assign to a value. So as you can see over here, they are assigning message to And now for something completely different, and they're assigning this random letter n to the value 17 and pi to the value of pi. Let's just use a random variable x, and let's assign that to hello world. So we have to make sure to print this, because then nothing will actually happen in the console. So we print x and we get hello world, because we assign x to hello world. What if we did print type x? Now it's going to print that the type of x is hello world. So you can also assign a variable to any type. It could be an integer. And let's print both. Let's print x and let's print the type of x, and you'll get that it is 3 and it's an integer. And you could even do a float. So do you remember when we said that there is that sometimes you can get confused between strings and integers? For example, let's say I had a string 3. So obviously that's a number, that's not an integer. So let's print that real quick, and let's print the type of that. Oops. And obviously the class is gonna be string. Let's run that one more time. The class is going to be string, and it will print x. So obviously x is a string, 3 is a string, but sometimes we might, and later on you'll realize why, but you might want to convert a string to an integer. So to convert a string to an integer, you use the integer command. So we're gonna change x. We're gonna say now x equals this. Let's print the type of x. Now we're gonna change. Let's also print x here. Make a quick program. So we're gonna, what we're doing here is we're assigning x to the string, not the integer, string 3. And now we're going to print that, and we're going to print the type. So the result of this will be string. Now we're going to change it. We're going to use the integer command to change x into an integer. We're going to print this, and we're going to print the type. And that type is going to be integer. So let's run this. So as you can see, first we printed the x, we got 3. We printed the type of that x, which was a string, and we got string. Then we converted it, and that's important. We converted it into an integer. We said x now equals integer of x, meaning this previous x. So it's saying that x now equals integer of this previous x. And then we're going to print this x, and we're going to print the type, and the type printed was integer. So now you can also do this. Let's say the value was 3.23. You could also use the float function, and now it will print it as a float. So the same thing happens, but now it's a float. Now what if you have an integer? Let's say an integer 3, or let's just use 10 for this example. That maybe you want to convert that into a string, so you could use a function str for short for string, and now that would convert it into a string. So first it was an integer, and then it converted into a string. So going more into variables, you could almost choose any name you want to assign as a variable, although there are some rules in Python and even some unwritten Python rules that you want to keep in mind. So the first rule is that variables cannot start with a number. It just won't work. If you go to any Python program and start a variable with a number, you'll get an error. The second one is that you can't use spaces in your variables because Python will get confused. So instead, just simply use underscores. And the third one, it is recommended to use all lowercases when making a variable. Obviously, it doesn't really matter in some scenarios, but in general, it's just kind of an unwritten rule, and you'll learn a little bit later on when we discuss other types that you should use lowercases when making variables. And it's also recommended to use easy variables. You don't want to use something that's way too long and complicated. Maybe something that is relevant to the program you're making. If you're talking about the hourly pay in workers, and you would use hourly pay and not like XYZ or something that's confusing. And an important one, and this is the most important key thing you have to understand, and we actually went over in the first lesson, is that you cannot use reserved words as variables. And that's because these words over here are, Python understands it as kind of their own function. And when you use it and try to assign it to a value, any type of value, Python's going to get confused and will actually give you an error message. So keep that in mind when making your variables. Alright, now we're going to go over operators and expressions. Operators are simply just mathematical operations. So the plus sign in Python will mean addition, subtraction sign means subtraction, this star means multiplication, this slash means division, and two divisions are actually, you would get a remainder. Two divisions is division without remainders, and two stars are exponential, and a percentage sign does a division but just gives you the value of the remainder. And you could pretty much make expressions with this in Python, but keep in mind that these expressions use PEMDAS. So we're going to make a few expressions in Replit. So again, we have to use the print function when making our operators. So again, let's say we want to add something. You could always go back to the next slide and rewind it a little bit if you want to reference what those operators mean. But let's say we want to add something. We just do 2 plus 3, and we're going to get 5. We could also subtract them. We could do 2 plus 3 minus 1, and we'll get 4. And then we could do times 4 and so on, and you kind of get the gist of it. And you get the value there. Obviously, Python follows PEMDAS, so you might want to it will do the multiplication first, so you might want to put parentheses here, and you'll get a different value than if you wouldn't. For example, over here we get 10. If we take the parentheses out, you get 1. So that Python does use PEMDAS. You can even assign variables saying x equals 2, y equals 3, z equals 4, and print x plus y plus z. Or let's just do minus z. And you'll get that value right here. Again, we can use exponents. So to do an exponent, you could do print x, and then you could use double, and then y. And you'll get, what, 8? Yeah. And we could do division. So 4 divided by 2, which would be, let's just do 4 divided by 2, and you get 2. If you want, as you can see, when you do 4 divided by 2, you get that, you get that 0.0. If you don't want that 0.0, you could just do another division sign, and you'll just get 2. And that's the same thing if you get a remainder. Let's do 4 divided by 3. You get 1.333 repeating. If you don't want that remainder 0.33 for whatever reason, you do 2, and you'll just get 1. It just pretty much rounds to the nearest whole number. And yeah, and if you just want that 0.333, you could do percentage, and you'll just get the remainder. So, the remainder will be 1, not 0.33. I don't know what I'm talking about. The remainder will just be 1 in that case, because it's just looking strictly for the remainder. So you could also use operators with strings, and they work a little bit differently. And you can only use 2 operators, which are the addition and the multiplication ones. Let's have the string equal hello, and let's make the other string equal string 2 equals world. Now, if we were to print these 2 strings, and it's giving me the auto one, we would get, let's add a little space here. We would get hello world, because it's putting them together. Now if we use numbers, let's do 1 2 and 2 3, you'll just get you'll get the numbers added as a string, so you wouldn't get 25, which would be the sum of them. The way to do that would be obviously getting rid of these. Obviously these aren't strings, so you get, sorry, not 25, 35. And you can also, let's say we have an integer here, we could use a multiplication sign, the multiplication operator, to as well. So let's say we say string, which we know is hello, and we times that by integer, which is 3. You'll get hello, hello, hello. If we want to add a space, we can add a space right here. You'll get some space there. Hello, hello, hello. So one of the last things we're going to talk about is user input, and this is where you get input from the user's keyboard. So this is a built-in function from Python, and what it will do is you use a function like this. You set a variable, and you make it equal to the input of a string, or there really doesn't have to be a string in the input, but you set it equal to a string, and then the input will stop the program and ask for a user input. So then whoever's on the other side will type in whatever they want, and then with that value you can return whatever you want. So we're gonna say name equals input, and we're gonna just we're gonna put a string asking what the user's name is. What is your name? And we're gonna put colon here, a colon there, and now we're gonna say print name. So let's run the program, and we assign the variable name, so it asks for an input with that string. It's asking what my name is, so I put my name, and it's gonna now print that name. So as you can see, it stopped the program when it asked for the input, and when I press the enter key, it goes to the next line, and it prints my name. So as you can see, and we're gonna go over it one more time, the key is right here, so I'm typing right here, as you can see. But sometimes what you want to do is do backwards / n, and what would happen is when you run that, the key's down here, so now you're typing down here. So that's something just to keep in mind. Another thing to keep in mind is that all of your inputs are given as strings. So any input I give, the result is a string. So for example, I said print name. Let's actually change it. Let's do number, and let's ask for what is your age, and let's put that colon there. So the value it's gonna give us is a string. So let's do print type name. Oh, sorry, number. Let's run that, and I'm gonna say my age, and it's gonna say that the class is a string. To change that, we could simply just use the integer function we learned before. So I could say number equals integer of that number. So it's gonna take this value over here, the input value we gave, and it's gonna change it into an integer, and it's gonna print that type. So let's do this. What is your age? 17, and now it's going to say that class is an integer because we use the integer function. So these are some exercises that I highly recommend you should do. These exercises are simple, and they kind of collectively combine everything that we learned today, from the types to the inputs and the integers and the operations. So very, very important. Usually you would submit a screenshot into our Discord for someone to review the exercise, but because these are two fairly simple exercises, I will go over them real quick. And so pause the video, do both of them or one of them, and I'll reveal the solutions in a bit. So this function is asking for a program to use that requires user input and welcomes them. So it's just asking for their name and welcoming. So this is a fairly simple one. So we're gonna assign a variable name to an input function titled let's just do what they did. So it would be enter your name. Can't start. So that's gonna call for a name, but now we have to, with that name, we have to use it in a welcoming side, saying hello and then your name. So we're gonna say print, and what we're gonna do is we're gonna say print hello. And I'm gonna add space there, and you'll see why in a second. And then we're gonna add, using those string operations again, name. And we're gonna run it, and we should get. I'm gonna put my name. Sorry. And it's gonna say hello Armand, which is my name. And you'll see why I put a space here. The reason I put a space there is because, let's delete that space. And when you put your name, as you'll get them together. So you need to add that space there. So another way you could do this is actually deleting the space, and you can actually, and this I didn't teach this yet, so don't worry if you didn't know what this is. This is a little bonus. Comma name, and what it would do is it would print both this string and then this string with obviously a space. So I put my name, you get hello Armand. So that's the solution to exercise 2. All right, so this is chapter 2, exercise 3, and this one is asking for a prompt for a user hours and rate, and then you're gonna multiply the hours and rate to find the total pay of those hours worked. So this is also a fairly simple one. This one, the first time I actually already did this, just so we can have for the sake of the length of the video. We're gonna first ask for input of hours worked, and then an input of the rate. And now to find the pay is simply just hours times rate. And what you want to make sure to do is when you're multiplying the pay, you want to float the hours worked and float the rate. Because if you were to just do it without floats, and I'll show you in a minute, what these are is, again, these are strings. These are strings without you changing them, without you altering these automatically strings. So you have to remember to change it to either an integer or a float. But in this case, we want to be careful. We want to do floats just for the sake, because these are decimals over here. The values we're given are in decimals, so we're going to change these to floats. We're going to float this, we're going to float that, and we're going to multiply them, and we'll set that equal to pay. So now we want to print pay. So I'm going to print pay, and then colon, and then we're going to add that to string pay. So the reason I did string pay and not regular pay is because this pay is now a float, because we've floated these. A float times a float is a float. So because we floated these, this pay is a float. And you can't add a string and a float together. So that's a big no-no. You can't add a string and a float together. So what we're going to do is we're going to add this string with a stringed version of pay. And we'll see what the program runs. So enters hours. We're going to just copy this prompt. And then rate is 2.75. And we'll get that the pay is 96.25. Exactly what we wanted. You'll see that we'll get an error when we did this. Well, actually, you won't get an error, but you'll see what we'll get. No, sorry, you would get an error. I'm wrong. You would. Because you cannot multiply strings by themselves. Enter hours 35, 2.75. And now it's going to be an error because you cannot multiply anything that's a string, because it's a string. So you have to make sure to float these. So that's the same thing with why we did string this. Because this is a float now, you cannot actually add a string and a float. You have to keep it consistent, right? So if I were to run this, oh, let's actually, oops, sorry, too late. Let's stop this. Let's run that. Enter hours, 35, 2.75, and you cannot add a string. And this is, remember, this is a float, so you're gonna have to string this for it to work.